It is common in most worlds, cities, kingdoms, etc. governed by a single entity or organization to reward those who support them and oppress those who defy them. Yevon was no different. Despite not having a supreme ruler that would rule in the style of a dictator and pass the leadership down the bloodline, the organization believed in a set of rules, known as Yevon's teachings, and followed them to the core. These teachings were often used and sometimes misused and abused, depending on who was using them and what hidden agenda they may have. Those who followed them were known as Yevonites, while those who opposed them were branded as traitors and non-believers, with the most prominent example being the Al-Bed. It was in Yevon's teachings that the creation of sin was the fault of humanity and the reliance of Machina, as a result of sin destroying any and all signs of Machina civilizations in Spira, and that if mankind atoned for their sins, then this creature would go away someday, which we know would never happen. It is also stated in the teachings that a final summoning is the only means to temporarily calm sin, as it could never be truly destroyed and will always return. But at least this feat would grant title of High Summoner despite it being bestowed after the summoner's death, as the final summoning and battle with sin will cost the summoner their life. This was a technique introduced by Yunalesca to the original founders and members of Yevon, who incorporated it into the religion. More details on this particular interaction can be found in the Yunalesca lore video in the description below. However, what is interesting to note is that the first High Summoner after Yunalesca originally defeated Sin emerged only 400 years before the events of Final Fantasy X, with the other 4 following right after, including Yuna. So on average, Sin has been bested and temporarily defeated once every 100 years. This is just the average point and not the point I am making. What this means is that between the time of Sin's creation and the first or second after Yunalesca recorded High Summoner of Spira, there was a 600-year gap where Sin ravaged the whole of Spira. Now, while we know some of the events that have occurred during this time gap, such as the creation of Yevon, there are many things that we do not know around this time, something we may look into in a future video. This time would have been terrifying, as since there was no summoner that has been able to defeat Sin up to this point, despite efforts by Yevon to maintain the faith, it is likely that people would have been more in despair after coming to the realization that Sin has been alive for so long without any summoners to step up and challenge its might. This led to people eventually becoming skeptical of the teachings and challenging their authority. Unfortunately, since Yevon's great influence using the power of Sin to enforce their teachings, one of those who challenged Yevon's teachings was a man known as Omega. He was once a Yevon priest who lived in the same time period where Sin had yet to be defeated. Despite his initial faith in the religion, he became skeptical about the rulers to the point where he attempted an uprising. Unfortunately, he failed and was executed for treason. However, his strong hatred for the organization he once served and dying an unclean death resulted in him becoming an unsent due to his strong attachment to this world, where he would spend the next several hundred years manifesting his hatred to transform into a very powerful monster to the point where when the party encounters him in the Omega Ruins, he was capable of creating a copy of itself that was still more powerful than your average Final Fantasy X fiend. Ultimately, Omega's defiance was not truly in vain and his death was avenged when the party defeated Sin and ousted the Yevon religion from ultimate power, as well as being sent to the far plane after his defeat by their hands. It was unfortunate that Omega lived at a time where Yevon was consolidating its power over the people of Spira using the power of Sin, leading to his defiance and his tragic uprising. But without people like him, who challenged the status quo and hoped for a better world than they were currently living in, Spira would have most certainly continued being controlled by Yevon and witnessing acts of destruction through Sin, and its people would have continued to live in fear for their entire lives as well as those succeeding them. Despite Omega being a small character and rather very powerful opponent, his life showed 2 main things: the punishment of those who defy the status quo, as well as the power of attachment to the world upon their death, especially if allowed to manifest in isolation without being given a proper sending for hundreds of years. It is truly a fascinating concept to explore and perhaps one that holds true in many worlds, even the real one. If you all enjoyed this video, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe and check out more related content. Other than that, this has been Enzo, and that, as they say, is that.